Since you claim to be so smart, solve this." The words hang in the air, sharp, unyielding. Before we continue the story, comment what city you're watching us from. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications if you enjoy stories like this. The words reverberate off the walls of the Ivy Hills College Lecture Hall, a room filled with students, each one privileged, each one elite. And yet, in this moment, only one figure stands under the brutal spotlight. Amina Columba, the only black woman in this sea of predominantly white faces, her hands trembling, her heart pounding. Her accent foreign, her presence alien. But she has one thing they cannot see, the quiet strength of someone who has fought harder for every inch of knowledge than most could ever comprehend. Her eyes narrow as she stares at the blackboard. The numbers and symbols twist before her eyes, a cruel puzzle set by a man who believed he knew the boundaries of intellect. A man who assumed he could crush any challenge with a sneer, with mockery, with the weight of his position. Dr. Harold Whitmore, a professor whose arrogance was as much a part of his reputation as his academic achievements. But now, in this moment, he'd made a fatal mistake. "Solve this," he had commanded, his voice dripping with condescension. But what he didn't know, what no one in this room could possibly know, was that Amina had been solving problems like this her whole life. Not on whiteboards, not in the sterile halls of this ivory tower, but in the dusty, sun-scorched village where she grew up, with nothing but the patterns of nature and the deep faith in her heart to guide her. In the midst of her nervousness, a single prayer escapes her lips. "Lord, let me not fail." The room falls silent as Amina approaches the chalk. Every movement she makes seems to stretch time. The cold, harsh light of the lecture hall doesn't reach her, for she's not there. She is back in her village, calculating rainfall patterns to predict the harvest, tracing the angles of the sun to know when to plant, when to sow, when to reap. As she writes, the equations begin to unravel before her. The complexity of the math, unfathomable to her classmates, becomes a language she has known since childhood, a language woven into the fabric of her existence. In the corner of the room, whispers begin. Eyes dart between the board and her, incredulous, confused. Some students look at each other with disbelief. How could this girl from a remote village in Africa, so different, so out of place, be solving something no one else could? The professor's face tightens. His pupils constrict. The challenge he had issued with such confidence now seems foolish, even reckless. The room holds its breath. Suddenly, the clock on the wall seems to stop ticking. Everything becomes eerily still. The tension mounts, the weight of history heavy on the air. Amina's chalk moves in a delicate, almost rhythmic motion, each mark a testament to the years of struggle, of doubt, of faith that had led her to this moment. Then, as the final number falls into place on the board, Amina steps back. Silence. The students shift uncomfortably in their seats. The professor doesn't speak. His eyes flicker to the chalkboard, and for a moment, just a moment, he hesitates. Something shifts in his mind, but he says nothing. Amina stands there, her chest heaving, her mind calm, a prayer still nestled deep in her heart. The challenge was over. The board now held not just numbers, but the silent testimony of a girl who had never been meant to be here. A girl who had never been meant to succeed in this world. But she had. She had beaten the odds. She had solved the problem. And yet, in this moment, as the world around her holds its breath, one thing becomes painfully clear. This was just the beginning. The story of how a girl from a small, forgotten village would shatter the expectations of an entire institution, would rise against the tide of prejudice, and would change the course of her own destiny had just begun. But in that lecture hall, one truth remained unspoken. The real battle was not over math. The real battle had just begun. A battle of pride. A battle of belief. A battle for truth. How far would Amina be willing to go to prove her worth? How far would they push her before they realized that beneath her humble appearance, she held the strength of a lion? And more importantly, how would her faith in Jesus Christ, her unwavering belief that he had a purpose for her, guide her when the world would try to tear her down? The stakes were higher than anyone could imagine. But one thing was certain, this was far from the end. Amina Columba was born in the simplest of circumstances, in a mud-brick village nestled on the fringes of Uganda's Great Savannah. There was no electricity, no modern conveniences, and certainly no academic institutions that could shape her future. She was born into a world where survival was the only thing that mattered, and the only path forward was the one carved out by the hands of those who struggled alongside her in that village. Life was raw. Life was honest. And life, at its core, was about the bare essentials: food, water, shelter. Amina's mornings began with the rising sun and the sound of birds calling across the horizon. The first task of the day was always the same: fetching water from the well, a journey that seemed endless. Amina's young feet would press into the dust of the earth, the heavy bucket swinging from her hand, its weight a reminder of the work to come. It wasn't just the water that was heavy, but the weight of the dreams she carried in her heart. Dreams that no one could see, dreams that no one could understand, not even her mother. Her mother, a woman of few words but great wisdom, had raised her with a deep sense of faith. "One day, the world will need your mind, Amina," she would often say as they sat by the flickering flame of a kerosene lamp, her mother's hand skillfully weaving a basket. "But never forget to follow Jesus first." In the quiet of those nights, Amina would work on her studies, her mind constantly hungry for knowledge, drawing patterns in the dirt with sticks, abstract mathematical problems she had no formal training for. There was no chalkboard here, no classroom, but the world around her was one big puzzle, and Amina loved to solve it. She studied the way the stars moved across the sky, the way the seasons changed, the geometry of the leaves and branches. Even in a world of simplicity, Amina had discovered the elegance of logic, the beauty of numbers. Her mother's words echoed in her heart as she lay on her mat at night, staring at the sky. "You will do something great, Amina." And so, with nothing but determination, faith, and a natural gift for numbers, Amina's mind began to stretch far beyond the boundaries of her village. It wasn't long before the whispers of her brilliance reached the ears of a missionary who, with the grace of God, offered Amina the opportunity of a lifetime: a scholarship to Ivy Hills College, one of the most prestigious institutions in Connecticut, nestled in the heart of America. Her journey to the United States was a revelation in itself. The moment Amina stepped off the plane, she was overwhelmed by the sheer scale of everything. The towering buildings, the bustling streets, the cold air that cut through her skin like nothing she had ever felt. The world here was different. People moved with a speed that made her dizzy, their faces impassive, their worlds seemingly self-contained. But it wasn't just the physical changes that shocked her. It was the cultural shock, the invisible walls of alienation that hit her every time she spoke. Her thick accent, though rich with history, was misunderstood. Her clothes, simple and practical, felt out of place in a world of designer brands and pressed suits. The cafeteria, where students flocked in tight groups, seemed more like a social arena than a place for sustenance. She sat alone, silently eating her meal, her mind always on the lessons she was meant to learn. The cafeteria felt like another classroom, one where she was not welcome, one where she had to prove herself every day. But none of this deterred Amina. She knew that she was meant to be here. She had been called for a purpose far greater than any academic achievement. Her faith in Jesus was her guiding light, the one constant that kept her grounded when everything around her seemed like a blur of uncertainty. The real challenge, however, wasn't the cold weather or the alien stares. It was Dr. Harold Whitmore, the professor who held the keys to her academic future. Dr. Whitmore, a man revered and feared by students and faculty alike, was a genius in his own right. Brilliant, sharp, and exacting in his demands. His classes were intense, his lectures legendary, his expectations impossibly high. He was the type of professor who demanded perfection, whose reputation for scorn was as well known as his expertise in mathematics. He was also a man who had little patience for what he considered emotion in academics. Faith, hope, belief, these were things he had no time for. In his mind, numbers and equations spoke for themselves. They were cold, hard truths that did not require the warmth of human connection or spiritual guidance. And yet, Amina, in all her humility and faith, would soon learn that Dr. Whitmore's world was about to collide with her own in the most dramatic of ways. It started innocently enough. Amina had written an essay for his class, an essay in which she expressed how her faith in Jesus guided her studies, how her belief in God gave her the strength to overcome the most difficult of problems. For Amina, her connection to God wasn't just a personal matter. It was interwoven with every thought, every equation, every decision she made. When Dr. Whitmore read her essay, his disdain was unmistakable. With a single flick of his wrist, he returned the paper with a harsh, almost mocking comment. Leave your superstition at the door. Math is not about belief. It is about reason. Amina stood still as she read the words, her heart sinking. This was the man she had to impress. This was the man who could determine her future. But she had no intention of abandoning the one thing that had brought her this far, her faith. Her mother's voice echoed once more. Never forget to follow Jesus first. But here, in the halls of Ivy Hills College, in the sterile classrooms and bustling corridors, Amina was learning a painful lesson. In this world of privilege and perfection, her faith was seen as an obstacle. She was seen as an outsider, a stranger in a land that had no place for her. Her faith, her origins, her accent, all of it made her stand apart. But Amina had something far stronger than the power of prestige or the allure of success. She had a mind that would not be silenced and a heart that would not be broken. And as the days passed, as she struggled to fit in, one thing became clear to her. This was no longer about proving her worth to others. This was about something much bigger. Something only she could understand. Amina Columba was here for a reason, and she wasn't going anywhere. And neither was Dr. Whitmore. The air in the lecture hall felt different that day. It was as if the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for something to break, something to give. Amina had already learned to stay quiet, to stay out of the spotlight, to work diligently in the background and avoid attracting attention. But this moment, this particular moment, was different. The tension in the room was palpable as Dr. Harold Whitmore paced before the blackboard, his hands clasped behind his back. His expression was cold, clinical, as always. His glasses glinted under the fluorescent lights, and his sharp, angular features cut through the air like a blade. Today, he had a point to prove, a lesson he was determined to impart, though Amina had no idea what was coming. She sat at her desk, hands clasped together, her mind focused on the problem in front of her. But her thoughts weren't entirely on the equations. She had felt the eyes of her classmates on her for weeks now, always judging, always questioning her place in this room, in this institution. The whispers were constant, mocking her accent, her clothes, her culture. She had grown accustomed to the silent stares, the subtle exclusions. But it was nothing compared to what was about to unfold. Dr. Whitmore stopped at the front of the room and turned to face his class. His voice broke the silence like a clap of thunder. "Let's see if your God helps you now, Amina," he said, his words deliberate, dripping with disdain. The entire class shifted. It was a subtle thing, at first, just a shift in posture, the sound of pins scratching against paper slowing down. But everyone in that room understood what was happening. The professor was about to make an example out of her. Amina's stomach twisted. Her palms grew clammy. Why did it always have to be like this? She had been warned about professors like him, arrogant, dismissive, driven by the belief that intellect was all that mattered, that faith was a weakness to be eradicated. Dr. Whitmore walked to the blackboard and picked up a piece of chalk, his movements methodical, almost mechanical. Without a word, he began writing a complex multivariable calculus proof on the board, his handwriting sharp, angular, and precise. Each symbol seemed to mock Amina's very existence, as if this problem were a test not just of her intellectual capacity, but of her very right to be here. When he finished, he turned to face her. "Let's see if you can solve this by the end of class, Amina. Let's see if your God will help you now." The room was eerily quiet. Then, as if on cue, the whispers began. They were soft at first, hushed tones, but they grew louder, spreading like wildfire. The students were already betting on her failure. Some smiled to themselves, others exchanged knowing glances. This was a game to them, a way to reaffirm their belief that someone like Amina had no business being here. Gasps. Laughter. It wasn't loud at first, just a stifled chuckle here and there, but it didn't take long for the laughter to build. Amina felt the weight of it like a physical force. It was as if every sound in the room was directed at her. Her thick accent, her simple upbringing, her faith, her presence. It felt like the walls were closing in, like the ground beneath her was about to give way. And then, as the laughter grew, something else grew inside of Amina. Something that was no longer tied to fear or doubt. It was faith. Unshakable. Undeniable. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. Amina sat there, in the same classroom where she had been humiliated countless times, but this time, the game had changed. This wasn't about being accepted. This wasn't about proving anyone wrong. This was about something bigger, something beyond the classroom, beyond the sneers, beyond the equations on the board. Amina closed her eyes. The room fell silent. For a brief moment, it was as though the laughter had never happened. Her mind, though still aware of the eyes on her, found peace in the stillness. The voices in her head quieted, replaced by one thought, one prayer. Lord, give me the strength to do this. I trust in you. Let your wisdom flow through me. The professor's mocking gaze burned through her, but she didn't flinch. Her faith was her anchor, and it was stronger than any ridicule he could throw her way. The students, still waiting for her to fail, still waiting to see her falter, had no idea that they had just underestimated something far greater than they could comprehend. Slowly, Amina opened her eyes, and in that single moment, something shifted. Her entire being, her spirit, her very presence became resolute. She reached for the chalk. It felt strangely familiar, almost comforting in her hand. Amina had solved puzzles in the dirt with sticks, had found answers to problems the world said were unsolvable. This was no different. She would solve this problem with the same conviction, the same grace, that had carried her through her entire life. She would solve it not for them, but for herself. For the girl from a small African village who had dared to dream of something bigger. Amina walked to the board, her movement steady, her heart unwavering. The chalk made a soft scratch against the board as she began. She didn't need to look at the class. She didn't need to see the mocking stares or hear the whispers. She didn't even need to prove anything to them. All she needed was to focus on what was in front of her, the equation, the numbers, the problem. And with each stroke of the chalk, the solution became clearer, more tangible. As she worked, the tension in the room grew. The students were no longer laughing. Their eyes were locked on the board, transfixed by the rhythm of her writing, the way she moved with purpose, with precision. Even Dr. Whitmore seemed to hesitate for a brief moment, his eyes narrowing as he watched her, unsure of what to make of this. For the first time, he was the one who was unsure. Amina's hand continued to move, each line of chalk bringing her closer to the answer. The rest of the world, the rest of the class, faded away. All that mattered now was the quiet confidence she had found within herself, the quiet assurance that she was more than what they saw, more than the outsider, more than the girl with the thick accent. She would finish this, not because she had to, but because she knew, deep down, that she could. The problem on the board was no longer a challenge. It was a conversation with the universe. And Amina Colombo was listening, but the clock was ticking. The class was coming to an end. The moment of truth was fast approaching. Would Amina succeed, or would Dr. Whitmore's scorn be too much to overcome? With the chalk still in her hand, Amina closed her eyes again, just for a second, and whispered, "Thank you, Lord. This is for you." She picked up the pace, and the class held its breath. Are you enjoying this story so far? Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Also, check out our uplifting ebooks and get them from the link in the description of this video. As Amina's chalk moved across the blackboard, a strange, almost surreal calm washed over her. It wasn't the cool silence of the classroom that surrounded her, nor the weight of the stairs pressing into her from every corner. It was something deeper, something that came from years of practice, from moments spent alone in the quiet of Uganda, where the world's complexities were stripped down to their most elemental forms. Flashbacks flooded her mind. She remembered the way the rain would dance across the fields, the droplets falling in intricate patterns, their paths twisting and intertwining with an invisible logic that only a few could comprehend. She'd spent hours watching the raindrops form ripples and puddles, tracing their arcs with her eyes, marveling at the way nature itself seemed to follow an unspoken order. In the evenings, after the day's work was done, she would sit beneath the great mango tree, watching the leaves flutter in the breeze, their movement mirroring the symmetries and shapes she had seen in her textbooks. Even the simplest things, the branches of firewood stacked outside her hut, held patterns she couldn't help but study, as if the universe itself had written the answers to her questions across every surface of the earth. It was here, in the simplicity of her life, that Amina had first understood the beauty of mathematics. It wasn't about abstract theories or symbols on a page. It was about finding order, clarity, and structure in the chaos of life. Whether it was the way the stars lined up in the night sky, or the way the fire would fit together perfectly, Amina knew that everything, in its purest form, followed the same rules, the same truths. The same answers. As she stood at the blackboard now, in front of her classmates, the connection between those moments in her childhood and the proof she was solving in this very room was unmistakable. The patterns and the equations before her were the same patterns she had seen in nature. It was as if all those years of humble learning in Uganda had led her to this moment. Her hand moved with steady precision, drawing the curves, the derivatives, and the limits with calm, measured strokes. Step by step, she worked her way through the multivariable calculus problem with a grace that seemed almost otherworldly. It wasn't hurried. It wasn't panicked. She simply knew what needed to be done, and her faith guided her hand. Each movement of the chalk was deliberate, calculated, as if her mind and heart were in perfect alignment. There was no doubt in her. There was only the certainty of the answers she had already found within herself. Her thoughts were clear, undistracted. This was her moment. This was why she was here. The class had gone completely silent. Not even the slightest murmur could be heard. All eyes were fixed on the board, watching in disbelief as Amina continued to solve the problem with an ease that left no room for doubt. Dr. Whitmore's jaw tightened. His lips pressed into a thin line. He crossed his arms in front of his chest, a frown deepening on his face. His eyes, usually sharp and calculating, seemed to narrow as he watched her work. There was no mistake here. Amina Colombo wasn't just solving the problem, she was rewriting his assumptions, his beliefs about what intellect was, what potential looked like. And it terrified him. For the first time, he felt his control slipping. This was no longer a classroom of his domain. Amina had entered a space where logic and reason intertwined with something greater, something he couldn't understand, something that went beyond the numbers. Her mind had transcended the very limits he had set for her, and he couldn't quite grasp it. And then, just as she reached the final step, she placed the last symbol on the board. The answer was correct. The classroom was dead silent. The tension hung thick in the air, as if time itself had come to a standstill. Amina turned slowly, facing the class, her heart pounding in her chest. But her face, calm and serene, betrayed nothing of the storm she felt inside. Dr. Whitmore stood still, his arms now uncrossed, his fingers tapping against his arms nervously. His eyes never left her. The class waited for him to speak, but he didn't. He couldn't. Amina had done it. She had solved the impossible, not with arrogance or force, but with a quiet grace that none of them could have predicted. But outside the classroom, the real battle was just beginning. As the class filed out, some of the students threw mocking glances at Amina. She got lucky. There's no way she really knew how to solve that. Amina heard the words, though she didn't turn around. They didn't matter. She knew what she had done, and more importantly, she knew what it had meant. It wasn't about winning their approval. It was about finding peace within herself, about proving that she belonged, not because of where she came from, but because of who she was. But the mockery didn't stop. A group of students approached her in the hallway, sneering at her as they walked by. One of them, a tall, blonde student with a sharp jawline, stopped directly in front of her, blocking her path. "You think you're so special now, huh?" he sneered. "You think you're one of us? You'll never be one of us. You're just the charity case." Amina's heart raced, but she stood tall, unwavering. She could feel the words cutting deep, but she refused to let them wound her. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind. "Never forget to follow Jesus first." She smiled softly, walking past the student without a word. She didn't need to prove anything to him. She had already proven it to herself. And then, something unexpected happened. Emails started to pour in. At first, it was just a trickle, one or two students asking for help with homework. But soon, it became a flood. Word had spread quickly. Amina wasn't just the girl who had solved the impossible problem. She was someone who could teach. She began tutoring in the quiet corners of the campus, helping struggling students understand the most complex mathematical theories. It started small, just a few classmates here and there, but word spread like wildfire. Slowly, even some of the most skeptical students started to trust her. "I didn't believe in her at first," one student admitted in an email, "but she's the only one who really gets it." Amina had a gift. And it wasn't just in solving equations, it was in helping others see the patterns, the logic, the beauty in the chaos that had once intimidated them. As the emails continued to pour in, so did invitations. She was invited to join a private math competition team, the Ivy Hills Elite, a select group of the best students at the university. The catch? Dr. Whitmore himself was the coach. Amina's heart raced. She couldn't deny it. The invitation was a dream come true. But there was one problem. Dr. Whitmore would be leading the team. The same Dr. Whitmore who had tried to humiliate her in front of the class. The same man who still looked at her with disdain. But she wasn't the same girl she had been. She had been tested and had come out stronger. She had nothing left to prove to anyone. And this time, the game was different. If you're still watching, comment, "I believe in miracles." The atmosphere in the Boston auditorium was electric. The room buzzed with the hum of eager anticipation, the excitement of over 100 minds converging for one singular event, the regional math competition. Ivy Hills College, long held as the crown jewel of academic excellence, had sent its elite team, led by Dr. Harold Whitmore, of course. They had dominated the region in past years, their superiority unmatched, their reputation untouchable. But this year, something had shifted. Amina Columba had joined their team. At first, her participation had been met with raised eyebrows, condescending glances, and veiled dismissals. Even now, as she sat at the far end of the competition floor, a part of the crowd still questioned how she had made it this far. She was the outsider, the African village girl who had risen against all odds. But today, she had something to prove, not to them, but to herself. The clock was ticking, and the final round question was about to be revealed. Dr. Whitmore stood tall at the front of the room, his gaze sharp, scanning the students, eager to see his students perform. The judges sat on a raised platform, their faces serious, ready to analyze and evaluate the last challenge. The tension was so thick it could have been cut with a knife. Then, the final problem appeared on the board. It was complex, layers upon layers of abstract variables intertwined in ways few could comprehend. The problem looked almost unsolvable, its logic twisting and turning like a labyrinth of numbers. Students around the room furiously scribbled equations, their minds racing to find a pattern, a clue. Their chalk danced in a flurry of mathematical maneuvers, but with each stroke, their frustration mounted. But Amina, she remained calm. A quiet smile curled on her lips, the same serene expression she had worn back in that classroom at Ivy Hills when she had solved the impossible. Her hand moved gently over the paper, her eyes scanning the numbers, but her mind wasn't focused on what was before her. It was drifting back to Uganda, back to the lessons she had learned from the earth itself. The patterns that had once appeared in raindrops and firewood were now emerging on the page in front of her. The complex multivariable problem wasn't just an academic puzzle. It was a reflection of the natural world she had studied in her youth. In her mind, the numbers and symbols shifted into familiar shapes. She saw curves and lines as she had once seen the branches of trees stretching toward the sky. She envisioned the movement of the stars, the way they aligned, the invisible forces that guided them in their silent dance across the heavens. The logic was simple. Everything had a rhythm. Every question had an answer. With swift, measured movements, Amina began to draw a path that no one else had even considered. She wasn't thinking in formulas or algorithms, she was thinking in patterns, in relationships, in truths she had learned not from textbooks, but from the very world she had grown up in. A way of thinking rooted in faith and observation, in a deeper understanding of how everything connected. The judges were watching her now, their eyes widening in disbelief as Amina's chalk filled the paper with flawless precision. It wasn't just that she was solving the problem. She was doing it in a way that was completely unique, completely outside of the traditional methods the other competitors were using. Her logic was different, and yet it was undeniably correct. The room seemed to hold its breath as Amina reached the final step. She paused for a moment, her pen hovering over the paper, a fleeting moment of stillness. And then as she finished, the answer was correct. Not just correct, but brilliant. Amina's hand lowered, and she exhaled softly, her chest rising and falling with the quiet relief of completion. A few seconds passed in stunned silence. Then the judges exchanged quick, incredulous glances, leaning toward each other in hurried conversation. The murmurs rippled throughout the room, students glancing up from their papers to watch the scene unfold. The murmurs grew louder, then quieter, as the full weight of what had just happened began to settle. Amina had done it. She had solved the impossible, but not just in the way they had expected. She had done it with the kind of thinking that could only come from someone who had been raised to look at the world in a different way. The audience was on edge. And then, just as the tension was about to reach its peak, the judges raised their hands in unison, signaling for quiet. "We have a winner." Amina looked up slowly, her heart thundering in her chest. For a moment, the room blurred, the voices and sounds fading into the background. It was like the world had paused, holding its breath as Amina's name echoed in the silence. When the ceremony began, the applause was loud, but it wasn't as important to her as the quiet peace she felt within herself. She hadn't done this for validation or for recognition. She had done it because this was her calling, her purpose. It was in this moment that she realized she wasn't just a student at Ivy Hills College. She wasn't just a girl from Uganda who had been given a chance. She was a teacher, a leader, a woman who could change the world with her mind and with her faith. The reporters swarmed as Amina stepped down from the stage, their cameras flashing. They were eager to capture her story, to understand how a girl from a village in Africa could rise up and claim victory in such a prestigious competition. One reporter, holding a microphone, caught up with her. "Amina," she asked, "how did you learn to think like this? Such abstract reasoning. Where did it come from?" Amina paused, the weight of the question hanging in the air. She looked at the reporter for a moment, then at the crowd of students around her, their faces filled with wonder. With quiet grace, Amina spoke. "Jesus gave me a mind to serve, not to boast. All glory to him." The room fell silent again. The words echoed in the space between them, a simple statement, yet profound. The crowd had expected something different, something more academic, more in line with what they thought an Ivy Hills student should say. But Amina's faith wasn't a part of the formula they understood. It was the core of who she was, the source of her strength. And now, it was clear to everyone in that room. This was a woman who would change the world, not because of her intellect, but because of her heart, her faith, and the wisdom she carried within her. Dr. Whitmore stood at the back of the room, watching in silence. His eyes were fixed on Amina, but there was no longer any arrogance in his gaze. No smirk. No air of superiority. For the first time, his pride had been shaken. The man who had once believed that intellect could be measured by grades, by formulas, by accomplishments now found himself confronted by something he couldn't quantify. A woman whose mind and heart were bound by something far greater than mere equations. And in that moment, Dr. Whitmore understood. He had underestimated Amina Columba. The same woman he had tried to break had just won the most prestigious math competition in the region. But Amina wasn't done. She was just getting started. The days following Amina's victory were filled with a strange quiet. The applause from the competition had barely faded before a murmur began to rise, a whisper of something dark, something far from the glory she had so humbly accepted. At first, it was a subtle shift. Her classmates began to glance at her with suspicion. The smiles, the pats on the back, the congratulations, none of it felt sincere anymore. Then, the whispers turned to whispers of accusation. An anonymous letter was left in the dean's office, claiming that Amina had cheated. The letter, unsigned but detailed, described her unconventional method for solving the final round problem in Boston. It suggested that she had somehow accessed the answers beforehand or had been given help, despite the security and integrity measures in place. The accusation felt like a punch to the gut, and though Amina knew it was a lie, the weight of it was suffocating. The pressure mounted. Her once quiet campus life had become a battlefield. Students who had once been curious now avoided her. The kindness she had shown, the lessons she had quietly imparted, all seemed forgotten in the wake of the scandal. Even some of her former supporters began to distance themselves, unsure whether to stand by a woman so suddenly embroiled in controversy. It wasn't just the students. The faculty had begun to question her, too. The whispers had reached the administration, and the whispers turned into official scrutiny. A tribunal was called, a formal investigation into the allegations of cheating. And, of course, Dr. Harold Whitmore was one of the panelists. Amina had no illusions about his role. She knew Dr. Whitmore's views on faith and intellect, his disdain for what he considered unscientific influences in academia. Now, standing in front of him, under his cold, piercing gaze, she felt her knees weaken. He was the very symbol of the academic system that had been so hostile to her from the beginning. Now, the very man who had once dismissed her as an outsider, an anomaly, was sitting at the heart of this tribunal, weighing her fate. The room was silent as the accusations were read aloud. The faces around her were hard to read. Some of the panelists looked stern, others bored, and Dr. Whitmore's expression was unreadable, but Amina could sense the judgment in his eyes. Her heart pounded in her chest as each word seemed to sharpen the knife in her back. The tribunal felt like an eternity. They asked her questions about her work, about the methods she had used to solve the problem in Boston. They didn't understand. They couldn't. They asked for explanations that no one else had needed to give. They demanded answers that felt impossible to provide. At the end of it all, the words came down like a verdict. Amina was given a choice. Apologize and admit to having cheated, something she knew she hadn't done, or risk losing her scholarship, her place at Ivy Hills College, and her dreams. The decision was clear, but the burden it placed on her shoulders was crushing. She felt small, insignificant in the face of the institution, the powerful professors, and the growing accusations against her. She was just a girl from a mud-brick village in Uganda. She was nothing compared to the system, the weight of it all. She had wanted to be a light in this world, but now it felt like the world was closing in on her, suffocating her. At her lowest point, Amina found herself walking aimlessly across campus. She didn't know where she was going or what she was hoping to find. The weight of the tribunal, the accusations, the disbelief, all pressed down on her like a vice, and she couldn't breathe. Her steps took her to the chapel. It was quiet inside, a stillness that was almost sacred. The empty pews stretched out in front of her, bathed in the soft light filtering through the stained glass windows. The smell of old wood and incense lingered in the air, and for a moment, it felt like time stood still. Amina knelt at the altar, her hands trembling as she clasped them together. She didn't have words at first, only tears. The weight of everything, the injustice, the loneliness, the fear, came pouring out in silent sobs. She couldn't hold it in any longer. She had come so far, fought so hard, only to have everything taken away in an instant. Why had God brought her this far, only to leave her to be crushed by this overwhelming weight? Her mother's voice echoed in her mind, clear and strong. One day, the world will need your mind, Amina, but never forget to follow Jesus first. Her mother had spoken those words so many years ago, back in the village. They had always been a source of strength to Amina, even when everything else seemed impossible. But now, at the lowest point of her life, they seemed more like a burden. How could she follow Jesus when the whole world was against her? How could she trust that he would carry her through this when it felt like she had been abandoned? But then, through the tears, something began to stir inside her. A quiet strength, an inner peace that couldn't be explained. She remembered the moments when she had been told that she couldn't rise above her station, couldn't be more than the daughter of a poor African family, couldn't survive in this academic world. She remembered how, despite everything, she had still moved forward. She wasn't just fighting for a scholarship. She wasn't just fighting to prove a point to those who didn't believe in her. She was fighting for the calling God had placed on her life. She was fighting for something deeper, something more eternal. Amina's heart began to settle, the weight lifting just a little bit. She was not alone in this. She had been given a mind to serve, not to boast. She had been brought here for a reason, and no amount of accusation, no amount of doubt, could take that away. In that sacred space, she made a decision. She would not apologize for something she didn't do. She would stand firm, no matter the cost. She stood up from the altar, her eyes dry now, her heart filled with an unwavering resolve. She wasn't going to let this world define her. And as the days passed, Amina began to see a shift. Dr. Whitmore, alone in his office, reviewed Amina's work once more. He had done it reluctantly at first, convinced that it would only further confirm his assumptions that Amina was some fluke, a lucky guess. But as he meticulously went over her final answer, the way she had arrived at it, something gnawed at him. The logic she had used, the precision, the unconventional but flawless steps she had taken, it was like nothing he had ever seen before. For the first time in his life, Dr. Whitmore found himself doubting everything he had known about mathematics, about intelligence, and about Amina Columba. He sat back in his chair, staring at the paper in disbelief. This was no mistake. This was brilliance. And something inside him, something he couldn't explain, began to change. Dr. Whitmore wasn't just questioning Amina's work. He was questioning his own beliefs. The days after Amina's prayer in the chapel were the beginning of a slow, yet profound change. Word spread quickly that the tribunal had cleared her name. The letter of accusation, the doubts, the whispers, all of it crumbled before the weight of undeniable truth. The committee had reviewed every aspect of her work, scrutinized every step she had taken, and after hours of deliberation, they declared her innocence. No cheating, no foul play. Only an extraordinary mind, a mind that defied all expectations. When Amina received the news, it felt like the weight of the world had been lifted from her shoulders. But it was more than that. It was a profound sense of validation, not just for her intellect, but for the faith that had sustained her through it all. The path to this moment had been long and full of hardship, but now, at last, there was justice. Amina didn't let the victory make her boastful. She wasn't interested in proving a point to her critics anymore. Instead, she focused on what had gotten her this far, her purpose, her calling, her faith in Jesus Christ. And it wasn't just her who had changed. The atmosphere around her had shifted, too. Back in Dr. Whitmore's class, things had begun to look different. The man who had once mocked her, who had belittled her faith, now looked at her with a quiet respect. His proud and dismissive demeanor had softened, and he had finally admitted, with a surprising sense of humility, that her proofs were beyond reproach and, frankly, remarkable. For the first time in their academic journey together, Dr. Whitmore's voice was not one of judgment, but of genuine acknowledgement. One day, after class, he stood before her, his gaze steady. "Perhaps," he said, handing her the chalk with a rare hint of a smile, "you could teach us something." The class fell silent, watching the exchange. This moment was more than just a gesture of respect. It was a turning point, a complete reversal of their dynamic. Amina took the chalk, her heart beating faster. She stepped forward to the board, and the room held its breath as she began to speak. Amina's lecture was a masterpiece of clarity and grace. She didn't just teach them math. She taught them something deeper, something that transcended numbers. She wove together her understanding of faith and logic, showing them how both could exist in harmony. Her words were simple but powerful. "Math is the language of God's creation," she said. "Every equation, every pattern, is a reflection of His perfect design. We can find faith in the logic, just as we can find logic in our faith. They are not opposites, they are partners. And with both, we can understand the world more fully, with more grace, more purpose." The students watched in awe, the skepticism that had once clouded their minds replaced with a sense of wonder. For the first time, they saw Amina not as the outsider, the anomaly, but as a true teacher, a source of wisdom that went beyond textbooks. Amina's lecture was just the beginning of her transformation. It was a testament not just to her brilliance, but to her resilience, her ability to bring light into even the darkest of places. Months passed, and soon, the day came that Amina had been dreaming of for years, graduation day. The campus was buzzing with excitement. Parents, professors, and students filled the stadium, their faces glowing with pride. But for Amina, this day meant something more than just completing her degree. This was a celebration of everything she had fought for: her faith, her family's sacrifices, and her ability to overcome the odds. When the time came for her to speak, Amina took the podium. She looked out at the sea of faces, some familiar, some new, and took a deep breath. "My journey to this point was not an easy one," she began, her voice steady but full of emotion. "I came here with a dream, not just to learn numbers, but to show that the mind God gave me was meant for something greater. I wasn't supposed to make it here. I wasn't supposed to belong. But faith, perseverance, and grace carried me. I've learned more than just calculus and algebra here. I've learned that we are all capable of far more than we think. We don't achieve greatness alone. We achieve it with the strength God provides and with the support of those who believe in us." Her words resonated with the crowd. You could feel the collective breath of everyone in the stadium. Amina's message wasn't just for the graduates. It was for anyone who had ever been underestimated, overlooked, or rejected. She had become a symbol of what was possible when faith and intellect came together to defy the odds. As she finished her address, the crowd erupted into applause, standing ovation after standing ovation. Amina stood tall, a soft smile on her face. She had fought for her place, and now she had earned it. Not just as a student, but as a woman of faith, a leader, and an inspiration to all. But the story didn't end with graduation. The offers started pouring in soon after the ceremony. Companies, universities, even research institutions wanted her. One particular offer stood out, an opportunity to work with a groundbreaking aerospace company. They had seen her talent, her potential, and they wanted her to help solve problems that had once seemed insurmountable. The role would take her into the heart of space exploration, an opportunity that would put her mathematical brilliance to work in ways she had never dreamed of. But Amina knew there was something more important she had to do. In the quiet moments, when the buzz of her success had faded, she thought of her village, of the children who had never seen a computer, never dreamed of becoming scientists or mathematicians. Amina had always known that the purpose of her mind was to serve, not to boast. And so, she made a decision. She would return to Uganda, to build a school that would give children there the chance to learn, to grow, and to dream. The same way that faith had sustained her, she would bring that same faith to her community to offer hope, to teach not just math, but the power of perseverance and grace. As Amina looked out at the horizon, she knew her journey wasn't just about what she had achieved. It was about what she could give back. She came to learn numbers, yes, but more than that, she came to teach a nation about faith. Faith that had carried her through everything. Faith that would continue to guide her every step of the way. The final scene is not one of victory or achievement. It's one of purpose, of giving back, of continuing the legacy of grace and perseverance that had been passed down to her. And so, the story of Amina Columba ends here, but it's not really the end. It's just the beginning of something much bigger than any one person. Because when you follow your purpose, when you believe in something greater than yourself, you leave a legacy that never fades. She came to learn numbers and taught a nation about faith. The story of Amina Columba doesn't just end with the graduation ceremony or the accolades or the promises of a brighter future. No, this story, the story of faith, determination, and resilience, is a call to each of us. It's a challenge, a reminder that the journey of faith isn't just about what we accomplish on our own. It's about how we stand when the world pushes against us, how we hold our ground when everything around us seems to be crumbling. What would you have done in Amina's place? Would you have stayed silent, allowing the fear and doubt to silence your faith? Or would you have stood tall, even when the odds were stacked against you, declaring, like Amina did, that your faith was stronger than any challenge before you? Think about it. When faced with accusations, betrayal, isolation, and mockery, would you have been able to stand firm on your belief that God had a purpose for you? Or would you have given in to the pressure of the world around you? Amina's story isn't just for her. It's for you, too. It's a story meant to ignite something deep within, a reminder that we all have a calling, a purpose that's uniquely ours, and it requires courage to step into it fully. But just as Amina found strength in her faith, so can you. If Amina's journey resonated with you, if it inspired you to take a step forward in your own life with renewed hope and strength, then I want to hear from you. Comment "faith over fear" if you felt inspired. Let the world know that you believe, like Amina, that your faith is bigger than any obstacle. And if you haven't already, like, share, and subscribe to this channel. It's not just about a story, it's about building a community of people who believe in the power of faith, purpose, and perseverance. Share this story with someone who needs it today. Maybe someone who's facing their own battles, someone who's been questioning whether they can make it. Share this message of hope, because you never know how it might change a life. And before you go, turn on the notification bell so you don't miss out on future stories that will continue to inspire, challenge, and empower you. You have a story too, and we'll be here to walk with you as you discover the strength within. Remember the words from Philippians 4 verse 13. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Let those words sink in, as Amina's story has shown. No matter where you come from, no matter how dark the journey may seem at times, your faith can and will carry you through. Keep pressing forward, with faith over fear. Until next time, take care and trust that God is with you every step of the way.